Okay, so our next speaker is Robert Foss. Robert is the Legal Services Director at Entre Hermanos, one of our really amazing partners in this work. I told you a little bit about Entre Hermanos earlier. They work with LGBTQ, Latino, Latina, Latinx communities in Washington, and do a combination, kind of like, I guess I would call it wraparound services, although I feel like that's a technical term that probably has a different meaning. But they do health education, community support. They have things like movie nights, which is a really beautiful thing. I think so often our community gets together because we're fighting something, and sometimes it's nice just to get together and be. And so Robert is going to talk about issue spotting for immigration intakes, to help us kind of get an overview of some of the challenging legal issues that our clients may be facing in the immigration context, and what the basic questions are that we need to ask in order to pass that client on to the right destination. So Robert has been doing immigration work for like 25 years, I want to say. It's been a long time. Working a lot in California, and as well as Central and South America, but originally is from right here in Montesano, Washington, which is a lovely community. So welcome, Robert.
Thank you, everyone. It's my second time in this building, and it's the 33rd floor. And although I'm originally from Washington, I don't think I've ever been this high before in Washington. You know, because back in the day, Seattle didn't have that many tall buildings. And no, we're not going to talk about traffic. Okay, so issue spotting for immigration. Instead of giving some big academic presentation on immigration law and try to send you all back to law school, what we thought might be helpful for people in a clinic setting is a whole list of questions that if you don't know what to do, maybe you could ask them. And I'm going back to my first merits hearing where I'm sitting before, I think the judge from hell, I think that was actually her name. And I was so nervous to do direct, I didn't know what to do. So somebody told me, well, you have to have your direct all written out. And I dutifully did what I was told and checked off each question as I asked it, right? And that is one way to do it. It gets you through the hearing. Okay, but please, 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 when you're in the interview situation, don't ask all these questions. Don't think that you have to ask all of them. Okay, just if you're stuck, if you want to know where to go, ask the questions. What we need from that isn't necessarily the final analysis so that you can give the client the advice they need in order to get to a solution. You want to know what's significant. And then in the context of what we were listening to this morning, I also think it's really important to understand that immigration law primarily is the codification of the racial animus of the United States. People write into immigration law all of their fears. Okay, I can give you a couple examples, and maybe it would be helpful to have an example. I have a 90-year-old aunt that lives down there in Grays Harbor. And she's a retired teacher, she's educated, she should know better, I say to myself, and I love her very much. But she used to live in Federal Way, so she went to her book club in Federal Way about a month ago and said, well, I'm going to go to Albertsons, which of course is no longer Albertsons, and it's an Asian store. And so she said, I walked in there and I couldn't recognize anything, and there were all these other people around, and I didn't know if I was safe. And she also voted for Trump, okay. But I think it's important for us to understand that perspective. And there's a lot to unpack there with that. Why didn't she feel safe around people who work from the United States? But principally speaking, that's the impulse where the Immigration and Nationality Act comes from. Now, you might not believe me, but we'll get there. Okay, and people, ask yourself, what are the proposed laws? people want to put into the statute all of their fears. So, for example, in 1993, when there was the first attempt at the bombing of the World Trade Center in New York, one of the people implicated in the plot had immigrated as a minister of religion. So there was no big outcry in the United States that we have to reform the law about ministers of religion immigrating. Everybody said, oh no, we have to reform the law about asylum. Okay, so it's this particular mix of hatred and ignorance which animates this. Now, why do we start with this? Because when you're asking these questions, it's really easy to get into the systemic mindset. And you have to give yourself a little shot to protect yourself. And if you need a sterile needle, there's a needle exchange program right next to our office on Jackson Street. But you just really need to vaccinate yourself from the racism that is all over this law. Okay, I know it sounds shrill, but trust me, it's a thing. Okay, so asylum. Well, what is asylum? I like to say, and actually, I'm going to be extremely reductionistic on all of this. If somebody comes in and says, well, I want to immigrate, and I'm afraid to go back to my country, of course you're going to be thinking asylum. You know the question I want the answer to? Who wants to kill you and why? Okay? Who wants to kill you and why? But of course, let's unpack that a little bit. Okay, so some of the preliminary questions, well, where were you born? It's a relevant question, right? Because you want to know the context. You might know something about the world, you might know something about different countries in the world, but also place of birth is not the only part of citizenship, because some countries have lex sanguinis, others have lex solis, some a combination of the two. Are you a citizen of the place you're born, or are you a citizen based on your parents' citizenship? And those, and I'm going to say, depending upon who you are as a country, that might define the characteristic nativism in immigration law of your country. I know it's difficult, and I'm overgeneralizing, but for example, a country that only defines citizenship by bloodlines, as we say in Europe, do you think they have more or less of a potential for racism? Because they're very concerned about ethnic purity. Now, I can say that, and yet if you're a really, really small ethnic group that's in danger and your survival's in danger, you might be very interested in being very clear about who belongs and who doesn't, and how that happens. If you're a big country and you have a diversity of people, and you're still obsessed with who belongs and who doesn't, I think that's problematic. And I'm just going to say it, it's my opinion. Okay, but where were you born? Because you can be born somewhere, you can also have alternate citizenships, it's relevant information. So of what country or countries are you a citizen? And if you're stateless, how did you become stateless? And those are often fascinating fact patterns. Let me give you a recent example. I was once, a couple years ago, representing a Bedouin tribal person who lived in Kuwait, but was not recognized, was born in Kuwait, in fact, but was not recognized as a citizen of Kuwait. And in fact, wasn't recognized as a citizen of any country. Okay, and so that's an example of perhaps the government of the country should be called to account for their human rights violations for not providing nationality, because right to a nationality might be one of the human rights enumerated by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But nevertheless, those situations can exist, and then I think in the transition from the socialist bloc countries, there's a number of situations where some people ended up stateless. So those are, and then there's question number 4, which I don't know what happened to that, but let's just take a moment for a silent, empty question. And also, one of the things you might not have to do is ask any of these questions. If somebody comes in and sits down, most of my clients, all of my clients have a diagnosis of IRAD, I-R-A-D, Immigration-Related Anxiety Disorder. I just invented it. Everybody's traumatized. Literally, everybody's traumatized. Okay, so as you sit there and silently listen, just don't ask yourself, is this person traumatized or not? Ask yourself, how much trauma? Where's the trauma? How many traumas? I mean, seriously. Okay. Ask, do you think someone will persecute you in the future if you return to your country? What kind of harm did you suffer? Those are kinds of preliminary questions. My favorite preliminary question is fear of return. Are you afraid to go back to your country? Okay, now, oftentimes, the entire character of the case is illustrated by the answer to that question. Because if I say, are you afraid to return to El Salvador? And the person says, no, es que no quisiera. I mean, no, I'm not afraid, I just really don't want to go back. Okay, well now, what's going on with the answer to that question? Could be that there's real fear, and that this is just a cultural, linguistic, narrative style of expressing that fear. Okay, that's one possibility. The other possibility is, oh, by the way, they might not actually be afraid. Okay, so you don't know when somebody gives you that preliminary answer. I'm going to encourage you, in fact, to listen not just to the answers of questions, but listen deeper, listen for the narrative. Because I think, in terms of whether or not you believe the person, and we do this with our jury instructions all the time, use your common sense, isn't that one of the jury instructions? Use your common sense to think, is this person telling the truth based on your experience? The problem with that is you're substituting your cultural experience for the client. Okay, so one way to sort of get around that is to spend enough time to hear the client's narrative. Okay, and I'm going to say in immigration court, I see it every single day. The way the client tells their story makes all the difference between winning and losing. Okay, so the woman who says, I felt threatened all the time, and the cynical judge who says, oh, were you threatened at 9 in the morning? Yes. Well, what about 12 in the afternoon? Yes. And at 6 o'clock at night, did you feel threatened? Yes. Okay, what is she saying? She's saying, ever since event X happened, I have not been able to feel safe, right? That's her narrative. But she's using a style of expressing it that makes the judge say, well, I don't find you credible because, nobody gets 1,500 threats in one day. Okay, you're missing the point. Listen deeper. Listen for the narrative style. Okay. Fear of return has a subjective and objective component. So as you're listening to the narrative, ask yourself, does this make sense? Not that you're judging your client, but more importantly, you're asking yourself, does this make rational sense inside the ears of a gringo judge? Right? That's what you really need to know. Does this make sense inside the system's head? And if you see problems with that, then you probe with deeper questions to get to the narrative, because sometimes you have to do a little archaeology and excavation on the testimony. You have to go deeper. You have to say, well, I know that doesn't make sense. I'll give you an example of this, and I'm sorry that I'm just up here telling stories because I'm supposed to whip through these questions, but a woman walked into my office in Los Angeles and said to the front desk, I'm a soldier and I'm on my way to Bosnia. And she had 3 kids with her, and she was from Guatemala. And she had a whole pile full of newspaper clippings about, and this was in the mid-90s, about rape being a weapon of war in Bosnia. Okay, so I get the call from reception Roberto, you got to come out here. There's somebody from Guatemala. They speak Canjoba, and something weird is happening. Okay, well, so everybody was assuming, okay, and this goes back to the morning, you know, what's the subtext? She must be crazy, right? She wasn't crazy. That was her way of telling us that she had walked across Mexico with her 3 kids because she had been kidnapped by the Guatemalan military and held as a sex slave for 2 weeks and raped repeatedly. And she was mad about it and wanted to fight back. Okay, does that make sense? I'm a soldier, I'm on my way to Bosnia. Okay, well, okay, it might not make sense to the gringo judge, but it made enough sense to those of us who've been reading the human rights reports from Guatemala to say, okay, why don't you come on in, the kids can do something with the color crayons, would you like some tea, and we need to do some talking, and by the way, hang on because I got to call an interpreter who speaks your language because I want to really, really listen to you. Okay, so just because it doesn't make rational sense in the first instance doesn't mean that there's not a case there. Now don't deconstruct this too much because sometimes people really just don't make sense, right? But I'm going to betcha that more often than not they do make sense. Okay, and what's the legal test here? Well, a subjective component is satisfied when you go to court and say, I am afraid to return to my country. The objective component is the famous reasonable person in that situation would have fear of return. Okay. Persecution is another element, and again, this is my reductionist view of asylum. Fear, persecution, and motive. Who wants to kill you and why? Okay, persecution, harm or suffering inflicted, we have from Ninth Circuit case law, and some of the foundational issues, Cardozo-Fonseca and Desser v. Ilcher, the Ninth Circuit case. Have you ever been persecuted? Now you have to be careful with that word because a lot of times your clients might not understand what the word persecuted means. So you unpack that in as many ways as you can. Who hurt you? What happened to you? Why are you scared? What happened? Did someone hurt you? Okay, those are the kind of questions that go, have you been harmed in any way? What happened? Okay, another little thing, and this is coming out of the Latino community where I spend probably most of my time. The verb perseguir in Spanish means following after you and chasing you. It's sort of like a chase scene from a crime movie. So you might ask somebody, or your interpreter might ask somebody with their book-learned Spanish, fuiste perseguido? And so the client says no, which means, you know, it was 3 in the morning and no, they weren't chasing me down the dark street. Okay, but they very well could have suffered persecution according to our standards. So beware that not all words in American law mean the same thing to your clients. And I'm going to extrapolate from my experience with Latinos and tell you that this applies globally across pretty much every language. Okay, but how much is enough? You know, are there threats? Were you threatened? How many times? You know, is there threats? Is there harm? Is there torture? Is there physical violence? And the answer to the question is the case law is all over the place. There is some people who just have threats. You'll get a cynical immigration judge who says, oh, no, no, no. Whatever it was that happened to you doesn't rise to the level of immigration. That's their favorite negative decision in court. Doesn't rise to the level. Okay. I'm not even sure what that phrase means, but it's definitely a narrative phrase that immigration judges have packed into their vocabulary. There's other cases that say a single threat, if you took it seriously and the person had the ability and the means to carry it out, may very well be enough to establish a well-founded fear of persecution. Okay, so you also want to know, and there's another level here, as you're taking the intake, you might be curious, you know, does evidence exist? Okay, a little practical note. The minute you ask, is there a police report, and your client pulls out the 25-page document in some language whose alphabet you don't read, and say, here, it's all in here, what are you going to do? Well, make a note that they have a good document. Okay, but please, you only have an hour on this intake interview. This is an intake interview. So don't let the documents drive the interview. Let the narrative drive the interview. And I'm suggesting, you know, I mean, I know we want to be client-centered, but believe me, don't underestimate the ability of my clients to talk, particularly, oh no, this is going to sound so stereotypical, but my trans women, man, those girls can talk. And I love it. And I can easily get distracted because the story's so entertaining. Seriously. Even if it's horrible, even if it's filled with rage and pain, somehow the humanity of this person is coming through. I think that's a good place to start because you're doing a narrative analysis. You're connecting with that person. You need to connect on that level of joy if they're funny and if they're joyful, or if they're afraid, you need to connect with their emotions. And if you do those things, you get a better intake. You get a better story. Okay, things about personal, physical violence and injury. You know the questions to ask. What happened to you? You know, were you injured? How seriously? Was your life in danger? Did you seek medical assistance? That's what the court's going to do. Be aware that this might be an issue because many people, and particularly in the Central American context, don't go to health service providers in the first instance. So people are reaching out for herbal remedies. I mean, if they get hurt, they'll go talk to their grandmother before they go to the hospital. Seriously. And it's not a stereotype. Well, maybe it's a stereotype, but you know what? In rural Central America, that's how people seek health care, through the traditional model. Okay, and so that's going to be a problem for the court because the court is going to say, oh, well then you weren't really hurt that bad if you didn't think about going to a doctor. Okay, but if you're transgender or you're gay, what's going to happen if you go to the hospital? What are they going to do to you? What are they going to say to you? You might be terrified to go to, you might not want your family to know that you were injured. There's all sorts of things that could be going on. So keep in mind, not seeking medical care is a legally important issue that you have to hear about, but your client may very well have good arguments. And once again, here we are in the middle of this, and we are dealing with the racism and prejudice of the system, even when we're doing the client interview. And everything you do with the client is deconstructive of that. Okay, you want to know if there were witnesses. Other forms of persecution. Were you tortured? Was there mental, emotional, and psychological harm? The pertinent questions, you know, have you seen a therapist? Were you detained? What were the conditions in detention? Did you suffer substantial economic harm? Okay, all of these other factors actually go into the evaluation of persecution and whether or not it rises to the level. And there can be a cumulative analysis. For example, things that happen to somebody as a minor, for example, sexual abuse or bullying as a child, which maybe in an adult would not establish a well-founded fear of persecution, especially in the sexual orientation cases. If you're talking about a minor, you might very well be able to establish persecution in the past based on those cumulative factors. And so those are important things to ask. You know, keep in mind, try to visualize what's going on with your client. Oh my word, what did I do? Did I turn something off?
You fixed it. You're a miracle worker.
I am. Not. Okay, source of the persecution. It's really helpful to know who did this to you. Do you know who hurt you? Who was it? If you don't know who it is, who do you think it is? And beneath that, Was this person connected to the government of your country? You know, is your country's government behind this? Or are they complicit? And the language of the law is your government, for a non-state actor, is your government unable or unwilling to protect you, is the standard. Okay, now something is happening right now, particularly in the Mexican context. So if you have Mexican asylum seekers, when I'm in Tijuana interviewing people, when I'm in Los Angeles, when I'm in Seattle, it's all the same. Well, who was it who killed your husband? Saber. I have no idea. And it's really important to know that a lot of times people don't really know what's happening. But I have a theory about that. Even people who say they don't know, on some level they know. On some level they know. And if you're being threatened by, and I don't want to get into the whole boogeyman scenario about the cartels being these, evil things, because that's part of the racist mythology, right? But there are people doing bad things in the world. Over the course of my years, particularly early on doing human rights in El Salvador, I've had the opportunity to stare a couple of people into the eyes that I knew had done certain things, torture or massacres. And if you're at all a reflective person like I am, and I came at this from a faith-based point of view years and years ago, one wonders about the ideology of evil. One wonders, where does this come from in these human beings? What's going on? So if you're faced with that kind of, oh God, I'm going to sound Catholic, ontological evil. If you're faced with someone who is completely given over to the dark side, there we go, let's do Star Wars. It's less fraught with danger, right? If you've gone over to the dark side of the Force, maybe your client doesn't want to say that out loud. Does that make sense to you? Maybe they really don't know. There was a slide from earlier, the one about dissociation. I didn't raise my hand, but I probably should have, because I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I'm the one who can dissociate. My clients are much better at it than I am. I mean, seriously, all of those things they can do. But if you don't know, so the last question, if you don't know what to do with the people in your town or village, what do the people in your town or village say? Okay, now I love this because now we're going to jump to another language group. Do you know that in Turkish there's a form of the verb called the rumorative? It is said by people that. Isn't that wonderful? It's just like, it's like the best thing ever. Makes me want to learn Turkish, but I'm too busy doing other languages at the moment. But what are people saying about? What are people saying about what happens in your village? Now, it could be that it's not the truth, but I'll betcha if all the women at the market are saying something about so-and-so doing such and such a bad thing, that there's probably something to it. What do you bet? Okay, and of course, we're not going to do that investigation, but you want to have a way to connect your client to the motive, because the motive has to be tied to political opinion, religion, race, ethnicity, nationality, or something called a particular social group. And so when you get at this motive, spend a lot of time on the motive. Who did it? Who done it? Why? What the heck is going on here? Well, why do people do that to other people in your town? Well, what was your husband doing that made the narcos want to kill him? Oh, you don't know that it was the narcos. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, and you just, with your dialogue, play all of the sides. It helps you get to the information you need. Now, there's a flaw in what I'm doing, which is it's very male and patriarchal. Because I'm the interviewer and I got all the questions. Okay, so just relativize that whole part of what I'm doing and think of a way to reconceptualize it in the context of dialogue. I like the idea of friendship. forming friendship as legal intake. But, it takes way much more time than, I don't know. Sometimes you got to do triage, which is why it's helpful for all of us, if we want to gender these styles, that we can jump back and forth or move along the gender spectrum, and sometimes we could have a more stereotypically female approach to questioning, and other times it can be a stereotypically masculine. It doesn't matter, the gender of the people involved doesn't matter. I would just employ all of those techniques until connection is made. It's sort of like, do you remember when people used to do faxes, that little noise was going on, and I understood it that the two machines were talking to each other until they figured out what their common language is. I often do that in bus stations in Guatemala. And so you try a few words in this language or that language, and then suddenly, okay, this is what we're going to speak. That's what you do with your client. Okay, and then the other part of asylum, past persecution. What happened? And past persecution can be enough, according to the law, to justify a grant of asylum in and of itself. So what happened to you? What happened to you make you feel afraid? What was the most recent thing that happened to you in your country? Try to get some sense of the timeline. And this is one of my favorite questions to ask. Do you remember the moment when you said, I have to leave my country? Because despite the fact that there's 300,000 people stuck on the border right now, and with no place to go, they didn't do it for the fun of it. Every single one of those people had a moment where they said, oh my God, if I stay here, I'm dead. I have to go. Okay, and imagine if you just, and most of us here have access to some form of transportation. Imagine if you got on your scooter and went 4 hours, because your scooter doesn't go that fast, to the US border and ran across the Peace Park, because there's no fence there, there's no wall there, and found yourself in Canada and decided you couldn't come back to the United States. Where would you go? I mean, of course, I would head to Vancouver because I hear it's a nice town. But where would you stay the night? Okay, that's what every one of these people who are immigrants have done. There was a moment where it broke, and you want to know what that moment is. Okay, the other approach to asylum, and so one is looking back on the timeline, the other is looking forward, saying, well, what would happen if? And if you had to return. And there are people for whom nothing has yet happened to them, right? So, well, really, I'm just afraid this is going to happen because, for example, there's been a coup in my country, or conditions have changed, or I came out of the closet as transgender here in the United States. And I realized that my family found out, and they rejected me, they threw me out. And I realized my whole society would no longer accept me. And I've been reading in the paper about how many trans women in El Salvador are being murdered, and how many people removed from the United States. 138 people removed from the United States in the last 2 years have been murdered. Okay, removed as in deported, have been murdered. Forgive me, I need a rage moment. Don't you want to know the name of the immigration judge who signed those removal orders? Because I want to stand out in front of the court with a sign saying, Judge so-and-so, you have blood on your hands. Okay, and literally, that's the country we live in right now. Okay, so, excuse my anger, but it's really important to hear the questions and to win the cases, because the consequences can be brutal. I know a former immigration judge who says to me, I never knowingly deported anyone to their death. No, I might believe him. He's a good guy, I guess. But there's plenty of other immigration judges. I had one in Tacoma 2 weeks ago where our client, a lesbian, was raped and extorted and beaten in her home country of Guatemala. And when she got to Mexico, she applied for a humanitarian visa and then was kidnapped immediately by the cartels, who raped her and forced her to call her families begging for money to get her released. And then she finally had an opportunity to run away, got to the United States, applied for asylum, and the court said, oh, well, you know, with Trump's new regulations, you're no longer allowed to apply for asylum because you were supposed to apply for asylum in Mexico. And we argued for the exception because, you know, it's an exception of necessity. Everybody, that seems pretty obvious from that fact pattern, right? And what did the judge say? Our judge, who actually granted another kind of relief to the client, the judge, and she was, you know, very concerned, the judge was. And she said, well, there's a lot of crime in Mexico. That's unfortunate. And then she pauses and muses and says, I suppose even somebody could be a victim of crime here in the United States. And so the client's testimony was completely reduced by the judge to this narrative of, well, you know, you could be a victim of crime anywhere. That is how the current administration in the United States, despite the fact that there are laws allowing for asylum, is closing off the system to people most in need, especially women. Now, how did I get off track on that? Okay, other factors involved in persecution. We have to argue these things out, so we want to know how many time, you know, how much time did you stay in your country after the last event? Are family members still there? Did you return to your country after you left? I once had a client from Iran who was in a refugee camp and found out she had breast cancer and snuck back into her country to get cancer treatment under a false name before she fled again. It's an inconvenient fact pattern for an immigration lawyer, right? Because if she was so afraid, why did she go back? And the answer is because in a refugee camp in some third country, she's not going to get treatment for her cancer. And it was a life or death situation. Have you passed through third countries on your way here? And of course, the administration is trying to make that. They've declared El Salvador and Guatemala safe third countries, if you can believe that. Guatemala, that has the highest rate of femicide of any country in the world. Is that still true? Or has Mexico now overtaken it? I can't even remember. Anyway, not a safe third country. Did you apply for asylum elsewhere? Those are important things for us to know. It's part of the discussion. It's not dispositive because I still think there's some potential for us to find relief in the federal courts, and we have to take on these regulations. Okay, and then the third part of asylum. How am I doing on time, by the way?
You have about 5 minutes left, and I actually am going to go check on our lunch to see if it has arrived. So I would take 5 minutes.
Okay, let's see if I can finish asylum in 5 minutes.
All right, ready to go.
Because lunch is really important.
Well, it needs to be here in order to be important, so let me go check on that.
Okay, she's saying that I should talk until I see the lunch on the table. Okay, you have to connect the bad thing that happened to your person to one of the statutorily connected grounds. It's called Nexus. And I don't agree with American law on this issue. There's a case that Scalia wrote for the Supreme Court in 1990 called Elias Zacharias. It's a Guatemalan case where it says neutrality is not a political opinion, and the fact that the guerrillas recruited somebody had nothing to do with their political opinion. I think that's nonsense, right? But that's why I'm not on the Supreme Court. In addition to, never mind. But you do need to elicit the things that establish this motive. So now, the political affiliation is pretty easy. Most of us understand. In fact, it's kind of part of our language. We used to just say political asylum, right? Mm-hmm. You know, so we understand that political motives get you into a protected category. And what kinds of questions did you ask around that? Well, are you a member of a political party? What kind of activities did you do? Note to the interviewer, does this person sound like a politician? Because I think that narrative, and it's not that that narrative might necessarily be there or not be there, but listen to yourself and make a note and say, this person sounds like they were really involved in the political scene in their local town. And you know what that sounds like. You kind of know. And you could be wrong, okay, but you kind of know. So that's important. Also, religion. Well, let's do one more thing on political opinion. Sometimes, especially here in the Ninth Circuit, there's something called imputed political opinion. So if somebody thinks, if the persecutor thinks that you're sympathetic with this party, and you might not even be in that party, if they take action against you because of that, that satisfies the Nexus requirement. So another famous example, and I see the bunches here, is I had a client who, he was in a fight with another guy because they were both in love with the same woman, and they were in a rural area, and they're both two straight men acting like, apparently, how straight men act in those situations. They're fighting with each other over, anyway, it's very stereotypical. And I thought, oh God, this is not an asylum case. Except, the client then said to me, oh, by the way, that other guy, yeah, he's a sergeant in the Army. And he said, if you don't leave her for me the next time you pass the military checkpoint, you're going to be on the list of subversives. Now, is that just a private conflict? Or is that now a political case? And the guy might say, but I'm not a member of the FMLN. How could I possibly, qualify for political asylum? Well, if your life is in danger because they think you're a guerrilla, even though you're not, it's possibly a legitimate asylum claim. So that's an important thing to think. You can sometimes use this. We have even had success with the asylum office with imputed sexual orientation. And I get this because, if you're dealing with an unaccompanied minor, a 16-year-old from Guatemala or Honduras, who isn't ready to embrace, an identity on the LGBTQ spectrum because of all the social conditioning, and you might, in your superior Freudian analysis, think that they really are gay. But the client says, I'm not gay. They just thought I was gay because I'm a manerado, because I, act a little feminine. Imputed sexual orientation can be a basis for asylum. Okay, and there's two ways to approach it as a practitioner. Now, this is the advanced part of the course. Every single one of your clients needs to be in therapy because you want your client to be pretty clear about what their sexual orientation is by the time they get before the immigration judge. But having said that, your first theory is imputed sexual orientation. And if after 6 months of therapy and some deep breathing and the realizing that, and again, it's problematic if you have a minor client, they might choose to define themselves somewhere along the spectrum, and then you might have two theories for your case. Okay, same kinds of questions about religious beliefs. Now the race, ethnicity issue, and are we out of time?
I think finish your thought.
Okay, I'll finish this thought, and then we'll finish this slide, and then that will be that. We had a really excellent deconstruction of the race categories this morning, which I think is totally relevant to this. How we put that together ourselves in the clinical context is one thing. How the government, the judges, the systems, the trial attorneys put that together in the court is quite another thing. And so when people, whether they identify with racial characteristics or not, or what they say their race is really problematic in the Latino context. And one really good example is Guatemala, where perhaps 60% of the population can be considered indigenous Guatemalan, Mayan, some sort of Mayan. Well, there's some Xinkas and Lencas too, but mostly Mayan. And there's 25 or 29 or 32 different Mayan languages, depending on how you count. And most of the Mayans that I know, when we first met each other, they were very anxious not to be perceived as Mayans, because they wanted to be perceived as Ladino, which is, you know, a white Guatemalan category. And so to some extent it's a racial category, an ethnic category, to some extent it's a cultural category. And people, because of persistent discrimination, pervasive discrimination, there are people who choose to pass or choose not to identify. And so if you take off your traditional clothes, speak Spanish, and move to Guatemala City, it can be argued that you're no longer indigenous, except, of course, you still have to deal with the prejudice because of your skin color and the accent that you speak with. This is also true in Oaxaca. And just more pertinent to Washington State, if you have Guatemalans coming from Belfair, they could very well be Congobal, because Belfair, Washington is on the map of the Congobal world. You might not know that, but you can go to Huehuetenango and everybody knows where Belfair is. I'll bet some of you don't know where Belfair, Washington is. Okay, similarly, Southwest Washington is filled with people cutting salal up in the hills, many of whom are Zapotec or Mixtec from Mexico, and never in 1,000 years will they tell you. You know? And they might not understand you either when you're speaking Spanish to them, and they might deny that they speak an indigenous language because of the pervasive prejudice that happens. So these are things that we need to be sensitive with. They could be part of your asylum case. And so it might be uncomfortable. And how uncomfortable, you know, how much do you want to probe? I don't know how to do it. Well, here's how I do it as a big fat white guy, and then I'm going to finish. I think humility takes you a really long way. And so, you know, and yeah, I speak some Quiche Maya, so I try out a few of my words of Quiche. I say how much I like tamales de chipilín. I describe the roads around their aldea and their village because I've been on them on a bus, and I play the geography game. And then I kind of sit back and I say, do you remember, you know, that place by the river where people go swimming? Oh yeah, everybody knows about it, they say. Okay, there is something to be said about using friendship as a model. What do you do when you sit down with friends? You talk about common experiences, you find some common ground, you laugh a little. I don't see why you can't use that in the immigration context. And even if you have to ask those tough questions about sexual orientation and race and torture, and every question you ask is so fraught with difficulty, how are you even going to do it in an hour unless you have some empathy and some humility and some ability to listen? And even if you bumble around, you know what, your clients will forgive you for the most part. And I know that sounds patronizing and privileged of me because I'm assuming they're going to forgive me, but what do I base that on? I base that on 30 years of making so many mistakes you can't even begin to imagine how many mistakes I've made. And I still have clients who, in fact, everybody at the office was really jealous because one of my clients brought me a poncho with the embroidered lettering, Abogado Roberto, on it. And everybody said, I want a poncho with my name embroidered on it. And clients are sweet, they're beautiful, and they're very forgiving. So open your heart, be humble, and then ask all of those tough questions. Okay, let's have lunch.
Without further ado, Robert, you are back up, my friend.
Thank you. Okay, so I should probably give you the overview of where I was hoping to go, which I should have done in the beginning. I want to cover, in addition to asylum, I'd like to cover VAWA, U visas, and T visas, which are remedies that are available for people who've been victims of domestic violence in certain circumstances, U visas victims of a whole list of crimes, and the T visas victims of trafficking. And those types of situations do surface in immigration consultations a lot. So again, without doing a whole, seminar on each one, I'm hoping to give us some questions to ask that sort of flags those issues for us, if that makes some sense. So I'm gonna, I'm tempted to keep going on asylum, but no. We need to move on. Okay, so the U visa. The really significant idea of a U visa is that people who've been victims of crime here in the United States, and with the U visa, the crime has to take place within the United States, whatever that means. And I think that it's an underused visa. I think that there's a lot of people out there who might qualify for it. There are some problematic things about it. You get a U visa, first of all, it takes you 3 or 4 years to even get it. And then when you get it, you're in status for 3 years, but if you don't apply for adjustment of status after that in a proper time frame, then it all expires and you have to start over again. So there's a lot of problematic things about it. Now, what are some of the good things about the U visa? Well, people who are victims of crimes have a remedy that they can, at least that immigration worry is out of their life. They might be recovering from the effects of the crime, but they can address the immigration issue. The other thing about the U visa is that it has ample waivers. And I'm saving the whole section on inadmissibilities and waivers to the end. But you've probably, if you've heard anything recently about immigration, it's like, immigration's really complicated. And there's tons and tons of ways that you can be eligible for a remedy and yet not be able to access it. Okay, and so how many people here think that if you marry a US citizen, you can get immigration status? Like, isn't that out there? Everybody says, well, I probably shouldn't say this on the tape, but my husband and I have been together 16 years, and he still doesn't have papers, because he can't, the way the system is set up. Okay? There's just, and what does that have to do with? That has to do with prior immigration history, it has to do with procedure. Okay, so you have a law that gives a benefit, and then you have this really arcane procedure whose sole purpose is to whittle down the number of people who manage to make it through the process. Okay, and this is the methodology that the current administration is using to completely dismantle the asylum system and all of immigration. Now, the U visa provides us a little bit of relief from that nightmare. Why does it do that? Well, because the second requirement of the U visa is that you have to cooperate with law enforcement. So this is to encourage people who have been victims of crimes to actually file the complaint and then go testify against the perpetrator. And if you get certification from the cops or certification from the prosecutor, then you can go forward with the U visa application. In return for that, doing your civic duty, as some people might think of it, you end up getting out of things like past deportations, crimes that you may have committed that might have blocked your immigration, and other sorts of issues. Okay, so although it's difficult and time-consuming, it often provides a benefit for people who have no other immigration remedy. Okay, and it's an old joke in Los Angeles, but when I was in LA, people would come in and they would want a U visa. Have you been a victim of crime? No. And then my staff, who are very irreverent, would say, well, we could arrange for Chewy across the street to beat you up, and maybe, because he wants to get back in, never mind. Don't do that. It's called immigration fraud, and besides that, you never know what happens when Chewy gets, never mind. Okay, so have you been a victim of a crime that occurred in the United States? Okay, well, what happens if The crime occurred in Mexico. Are you going to qualify? No, you're not going to qualify. Now, this is where lawyering comes in. You still want to hear about the crime that happened in Mexico because maybe some part of the illegal act of that crime took place within the United States. You don't know. And maybe it's a crime that will be prosecuted by a U.S. authority. And maybe there's some way that you can argue that you were continued to be victimized once you came to the United States. So sometimes a U visa, there's a little bit of wiggle room there, but not very much. If somebody comes in and says, oh yes, I was a victim of crime 10 years ago, it was terrible. You know, somebody hurt me really bad, I got beat up, assault with a deadly weapon, I nearly died. Did you file a police report? Oh no, I was too scared. Okay, so the other requirement is you want to know, was there a police report? Did somebody investigate it? It's also helpful to know who the perpetrator is. It's helpful to know what kind of crime was committed. Okay, so what do you want to get to all of that? If your client walks in with a copy of the police report, and I'm not, believe me, I'm not saying that police reports are evidence of everything that's written on them, but it's helpful to have them as pieces of paper because you know what the officer who took the report was thinking. Did they think it was a felony or a misdemeanor? Did they think it was serious? What did they think it was? And I'm not going to give you the whole list of crimes here because there's something like 20 of them on there, but I still think that you have to have one of those qualifying crimes. Now, in general, it has to be a felony. And in general, it has to be a pretty serious crime. And in general, you have to be helpful to law enforcement. So in terms of the helpfulness requirement, what kinds of issues, what kind of questions would you ask the client about being helpful? Did you file a complaint? Did you talk to the police? Okay, did you identify or describe the perpetrator? And oftentimes people in the initial phase of being a victim of a crime might not want to be cooperative. And so the cops might write on their report, this witness isn't being cooperative. But later on, there might be a change of heart. You might talk to a detective who's a little more consumer friendly than an officer on the street. And then you might change your mind and decide to cooperate. So just because there's something in the police report that suggests you weren't cooperative doesn't mean the inquiry's over at that point. So you need to hear the whole story. Did you testify in court? Did the prosecutor prep you? Did you get a subpoena? Was the perpetrator convicted? If the perpetrator is like a former husband and somebody comes to you, and this happens actually more often than you think, someone will come in and say, well, you know, it was domestic violence, which is on the list of qualifying crimes, by the way. Well, did you testify? Oh, no, I went to court and said that I was mistaken, that he didn't do it. Or I decided not to cooperate. But now I want my U visa. Do you get the U visa? No, sorry. Okay, it really means you have to cooperate. With all that that means in terms of, and so the U visa is still not a panacea for women who are in violent relationships. Because what about her children? What about the person who's supporting them? We like to be really angry with perpetrators. I'm pretty angry with a lot of perpetrators that I've come across over the years. But is deporting the perpetrator going to make this woman's life better? Well, ultimately, I mean, we can be all ideological about it. But women make their choices in the moment, given the socioeconomic realities that they are facing in that moment. And sometimes looking for protection from the police and getting the abuser deported is worse for her children, at least in her mind at that moment, than somehow taking it. Okay, I'm going to say that that sucks. Yeah, you have a question? Sure.
And because helpfulness is so subjective, is there ever a consequence when a victim is trying to be helpful but they just don't recall and they don't add value to the case for the investigators? And an officer may say, you're not helpful because you're not helping me, but they're doing the best they can.
They're doing the best they can.
You know, dealing with the trauma.
Wow, that's an excellent question. And the answer is, in a practical sense, in order to get the certification of helpfulness, you're negotiating with the officer, with the person that the police department has designated as the certifying officer, or with somebody from the prosecutor's office. And so as an attorney, you're going to go, like you go talk to a police department person, or even the person who wrote the report, will you sign this? Oh no, I can't sign it, she wasn't cooperative. So then you find out who the liaison for the U visas is in the police department, you go talk to that person. Will you sign it? Because, you know, in the beginning she was too traumatized to talk, but later on she made a statement in court. And maybe you can talk that person into doing the certification. So, yeah, it's always an issue. And what's even more of an issue is law enforcement's willfully ignorant of all of this. I say willfully because there's been, you know, a decade of outreach and talk on these issues, and they seem to think that it's, you know, they have the power to decide whether the person deserves to be in the United States or not. And what they have the power to decide is whether they're going to sign a paper saying the person cooperated or not. The rest of the visa isn't up to the officer. And that's often, you often see that. And for example, I understand from hearsay, here in Washington State, there are counties and county sheriff's offices that have never certified a U visa. Is that surprising? It ought to be, because, you know, that's, even those kinds of sheriff's offices need complaining witnesses. You know? And when I used to do trainings with the LAPD on indigenous language issues, you know, they were worse than substitute teaching in a junior high school. I mean, they were rude and ill-behaved. I mean, I'm talking about the officers. And they said, well, what, you expect me to learn how to speak Mixtec? I don't speak those Indian dialects. That's what they would say. And you know what the answer is? You do like to get convictions, don't you? How are you going to get convictions if you're treating the witness badly? Excuse me. But this is part of how you play the game, so get over it. All right, helpfulness to law enforcement. I guess what I was talking about was our law enforcement being helpful for us, but that's a different topic. Harm to the victim. This is really important, and lots of people who on paper are victims of crimes are unable to articulate the facts for this part. And what's likely to happen at clinics is if somebody comes in and the U visa is really good, you know, they cooperated, they're a victim of a qualifying crime, and you know, they have 10 broken bones, and they have the x-rays, you know that that visa is going to go, right? And they have the certification. Okay, but who's likely to come to your clinics? I'm being nasty about clients, but it will be the same 35 people who were told at 2 other law offices that they don't have a U visa, and then they heard that this was a free clinic, and so they're going to try their luck again. And they'll come in and they'll tell you the story. And if it's not going to go as a U visa, you need to know as an interviewer, it's going to come down to how much harm you suffered. Okay, so were you injured? Do you have physical wounds? What were they? Is there evidence of them? Did you go to the hospital? And then what if, oh no, it was just verbal abuse? Is that going to be enough? Dicey. You know, so if there's no physical wounds, you want to know, did you go to a therapist? Did you go to a psychologist? Did you tell your pastor? What kind of stuff do we have to show how severe this was? Have you been to a support group? And if the answer to all of those things is no, I don't know that we're in the position as people doing intake at a clinic to sort of say to the person, I'd do it, but I don't think the clinic people can do this and say, sorry, you don't have a case, bye-bye. And sometimes I do that in that very stark way to sort of help people focus their mind. And I don't know, it could be tough love. It's probably not the best interview technique, just saying it probably isn't the right rules. But you do need to tell people the truth, that their case doesn't seem to be looking, this is the part that's missing. Can you think of any other ways that you were harmed? Okay. Hint, hint, hint. If you have a sophisticated client, they will already be up on the diagnostic criteria of PTSD, so you don't have to prompt them. And so if they start reporting nightmares and depression and feeling nervous walking on the street, and I remember one woman told me that she always felt, and this was woman-on-woman violence from a same-sex relationship, she felt that her partner was always walking just behind her on the street. That was a perception that she had when she was out in public. And it was a really powerful experience she had. And it wasn't until a mental health professional kind of worked up the whole meaning of that the U visa unfolded. And then it became really, really plausible. Okay, so you do have to listen carefully to these things and see if there's enough there, to think, can this be at a level you might call severe? And of course, we're sympathetic listeners. So I'm sure that every case that walks in the door, you'll be able to find those factors. And that's okay. But if the client is very clear, oh, no, nothing like that ever happened to me, what's the conclusion? I mean, it's good to do with questions. Do you want to say to the client, well, what are you going to tell the officer when they ask you about your severe harm? What kinds of things can you say in answer to that? Because we're going to have to tell them something. And that helps your client to sort of experience what the requirements are. Now, if you analyze my narrative, what is it that I'm saying about clients? Well, I have this old white guy's disease that makes me, tell too many stories about old clients that I used to have. And the answer is, you'll have one of everything in your entire career. There'll be one of everything, because every client is unique. And it'll be all over the spectrum. So just be ready for that. Okay, let's move on. Documents that might be required. Police and court documents, documents from therapists, family, friends, pastors, other people. One thing you might want to ask these clients, but especially any immigration client, is do you have your ID documents? Because if there's one thing the United States government wants to know about people, it's who are you? Right? They always want to know that. Okay, so that's a really important thing. Okay, and then the certification requirement. You might see this because actually a lot of your clients in this situation are pretty on top of this process already. They might already have their certification. And in the best kinds of scenarios, and I've seen it happen repeatedly, it's happened here, it's happened in other places that I know, but I remember seeing somebody here in Washington who had their 918 Supplement B already certified. Why? Because a victim's advocate had said, this clearly sounds like a U visa. I'm going to give you this form. See if you can get the officer to sign it right now. It was really nice because the officer's like, oh yeah, of course she's cooperating. Big old signature there. Now recently what have we been seeing? These are all processed by the Vermont Service Center in Vermont, and they're more and more, instead of being USCIS employees, it's being subcontracted out to private companies that make large donations to the Republican Party. And so those private contractors, when they adjudicate cases, they might be more ignorant than the usual ignorant American official. And so we've seen a lot of 918 Supplement Bs rejected because they want some sort of additional evidence of cooperation, or they want us to somehow prove that the person who signed it is the person who's authorized to sign it. And that's to use a Latin phrase, all the best things are Latin, you know, that's why I work for a Latin organization, but ultra vires, you know, lots of times government officials make up regulations on the spot to make things difficult. It's happening to me right now with somebody down in the detention in Tacoma. I've been texting back and forth about a deportation officer.
I got the docs.
Hey, that's Kelsey over there, my colleague and super wonderful, energetic, younger attorney than me, higher energy level. Am I allowed to say that? Okay. The other thing you do for the 918B, 2 people can certify, either a cop or a prosecutor. If you're worried about some aspect of your case, and this again is hint, 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 it goes beyond, getting the prosecutor to sign off on it with a nice letter from the prosecutor accompanying it seems to carry more weight with the adjudicators in Vermont than just somebody from the police department. And depending on your local situation, you might have better luck with the county prosecutor than the county sheriff. And I think you just try both, but that's something to think about. So what do you want from your client at that point? Ask them if they have the business card of the detective or the prosecutor, because those things are often handed out, you know, to potential witnesses. Okay, now let's move to the next relief that comes under relief for victims of violence. And this is the original relief for women who've been victims of domestic violence was under the VAWA Act, which I believe is 1992, which actually, some of the prehistory of this, did I say this the last time? There was a shooting here in Seattle at a nonprofit where an angry, estranged spouse of an immigrant was victimizing the immigrant at a social service agency. And that was a long time ago. But that fact pattern led to the inclusion of immigration remedies in the Violence Against Women Act, because the idea is that the beneficiaries of VAWA self-petition are people who are married to citizens or residents who would normally have a family-type visa, but the abuser is using the immigration process, the petition process, as one of the levers of control. Okay, and we know this happens. We know it's true. I've seen it more times than I care to even remember. Okay, so the first formal requirement is, are you a victim of battery or extreme cruelty? Now notice here that battery or extreme cruelty is not the same as one of the listed crimes with the U visa. And so this is how in the popular imagination sometimes your client will have heard that emotional abuse might be enough, and it might be enough in the VAWA context, but not in the U visa context. Okay, but how, and if you can construct this verbal abuse as extreme cruelty, and again, extreme, for those of you who like words, that's a word that probably needs a lot of oomph behind it in order to convince an adjudicator, right? So it isn't just one incident, it's more than one incident, it's context, it's narrative, it's psychological reports, it's showing how it affected psychologically and emotionally. And if you can do that, it's possible in a VAWA self-petition situation. Now, what do we mean by self-petition? Just to clarify the vocabulary a little bit. Well, instead of me having to wait for my husband to sign a piece of paper before I can immigrate, I can sign it and do my own petition just based on my relationship with this abusive spouse. Okay, so, but it has to be battery or extreme cruelty. And then the perpetrator, yeah, go ahead.
Quick question I had. So, I work for a volunteer lawyers program, so immigration is always our hardest area because we have like 4 immigration attorneys in Clark County. But Washington Law Help, like 2 or 3 weeks ago, came out with, they made a VAWA packet, essentially. So they've been trying to encourage us to send clients that we have triaged and determined that they should do a VAWA petition. They've been trying to direct us to have them do it on their own through Washington Law Help. I was just wondering if, as an experienced immigration attorney, how you feel like that's going to work out. Because to me, so far, I felt like this feels icky, just being like, here's a packet, here you go. I was just kind of curious if you had maybe other questions that I could ask some of my clients or things that I should be looking for to determine if that's really a great idea.
You know, I have an opinion.
I would love to hear it.
I don't know if it's the right one. Okay, let's start with, do y'all know what Daca is? That's the work permit for the dreamers, right?
Right.
For most of my career, and I'm not a real true believer in the legal monopoly, believe me. You know, it's not about power and position and monopoly, but you do have to kind of do it right or people get into trouble. I could go on for another 10 hours about notarios chuecos and the notarios who screw up people's cases, some non-licensed practitioners practicing immigration law. The VAWA, or the Daca kids taught me a thing or two. Those kids are smart, motivated, and they use the internet and they're on top of it. And every VAWA kid who walked in said, well, I've done my own application, I just want the attorney to approve it. And of course, you know, imagine if your liability insurance policy heard that. Oh, I'll just look at it, it looks pretty good, okay, yeah, why don't you file it? What, you didn't do the work? Now, anything that goes wrong, whose fault is it? You know, so from this conservative practitioner's point of view, gee, you don't want to touch that. And so, you know, I sit behind the desk and I said, well, that's not really our model of service. And you know, those kids did not take that lying down. Now, so here's what I say to DACA kids and similarly situated clients. Nothing about immigration is rocket science. There's no one concept which is so difficult that the average person couldn't understand it if they studied it properly. The problem with immigration law is that they've layered regulation upon regulation. Oh no, I'm starting to sound like my cousins in Grays Harbor, goddamn government rules and regulations, those environmentalists. But you know what I'm saying? They've made the process so difficult that it's easy to make a mistake. So what do you need a lawyer for? You need a lawyer to navigate the process, not to be, you know, the mystical shamanic priest who has all of the secrets of the universe and descends from on high. Okay, having said that, there's people who can self-represent. Okay, now in specific answer to the VAWA context, up until the Trump administration, I would say U visas and VAWAs, if I had a really motivated VAWA client and I said, well, you know, my priority right now are detained asylum seekers. And so I'm not able to give you the time you need to do this. And what if she said, well, I got all the paperwork here and I've read it, I just want to make sure I'm on the right track. As a human being, I might commit the malpractice of saying, yeah, go for it. I understand what you're doing. But see, here's what the client really wants. Well, then if anything comes up, can I just call you? So it's never a one-time deal. So if you help somebody even a little bit do it themselves, suddenly you're on the hook for everything. So you might as well just have them as a client. And then, under the Trump administration, it's possible, and we're very worried about this, but there are some reports from some states, principally back east and in the south, that VAWA applicants and U visa applicants who are unsuccessful have been placed in proceedings. Okay, which was the whole promise at the beginning of this, that this wouldn't happen. Now, the spokespeople for the USCIS seem to be indicating that that's just a coincidence. Oh, she just happened to apply for a U visa, and then the immigration agents just happened to come to her door. And I'm going to say, so I'm too afraid of them right now because I've seen too much in the last 4 years. And I'm too scared for clients to expose them needlessly to danger. And so I want to be sympathetic. And I know actually that there's some people who are smart and educated, and there's maybe some non-attorneys who could jump in and do this. And I suppose some of them have been affected, but then how are you going to feel if the person gets deported because you thought you knew how to do something? And it's problematic. And it's still problematic. That's an answer. That's my opinion.
No, that's great. That's perfect.
All right. Sorry to be a downer on this, because wouldn't it be nice if we could all sort of empower everybody so much that they didn't need lawyers anymore? What kind of a world would that be? All right. That would be a world where I would be begging for my living, or I would go back to the ranch and plant more potatoes or something. Is the perpetrator in a VAWA case... Oh, what did I do? I touched the screen. For VAWA, you must have a perpetrator who's a U.S. citizen or U.S. legal permanent resident. So, as a practical matter, you can't take this for granted. Because if you're dealing especially with a severe abuser, your client might think that the abuser is a citizen. Has she seen a passport? Has she seen a green card? Has she seen a birth certificate? Excuse me, but sometimes it's the case that, and it might be obvious, it might be, yeah, here it is, of course I have it. It's right here on my marriage certificate, and I have the birth certificate. But you need to ask for the paperwork. It's important. And because you know you're dealing with somebody, namely the abuser, who is capable of terrible things, lying is an outside of the index of terribleness. All right. Let's transition for a moment to the T visa. And this is probably, of these type of remedies, the least well known. But these are for people who have been a victim of a severe form of trafficking in persons. And the reason I'm a little more formal here and put up the legal definition from the statute is because I think it's less well known. And so it helps us clarify the issue if we just say what the definition is. So the person is a severe form of trafficking means either sex trafficking or, let's see. Okay, there's another part of the definition. There's sex trafficking or labor trafficking. Okay, but it bears reading this out loud. When someone recruits, harbors, transports, provides, solicits, patronizes, or obtains a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act, where the commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or the person being induced to perform such act is under 18 years of age, or labor trafficking, when someone recruits, harbors, transports, provides, or obtains a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, coercion for the purpose of involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. Okay, now the sex trafficking portion, I think, fits with our imagination of somebody who's trafficked. So we sort of intuitively know maybe what questions to ask about that, and we get a picture of the situation. The labor trafficking is more interesting from the sense that maybe she works for some, I don't know, what's the most wealthy neighborhood around here anymore? I would have said for a rich person in Bellevue. That's what I would say 30 years ago here. Is that still true? Where you have an immigrant working for, no, it's probably Redmond nowadays, right?
Medina.
Medina, thank you. I'm so behind the times. That's what we need. Okay, but see, you have a foreign person working, as a housekeeper somewhere. And she comes to you and she's not feeling good about her labor situation because no matter how hard she works, she still owes these people money. Debt bondage. Or a lot of the women who work in like adult group homes taking care of elderly people, and maybe there's 5 or 6 patients in there, and maybe those people have been trafficked, they've been provided jobs, they've been brought here to the United States to work in this situation, maybe they're making sub-minimum wage, maybe they're not getting proper health care. There's even there's kinds of slavery that happen. Ooh, my red past is coming out. Capitalism is almost a form of slavery. Ask any Uber driver. They'll tell you. I know a former PKK guerrilla in Los Angeles who drives Uber, who is completely convinced that Uber is the modern expression of capitalist imperialism. And I'm like, oh, honey, there are so many other examples. Okay. You gotta listen really carefully to these work-related stories. Were you free to leave? Okay, and so then there's questions. There's a whole series of questions that I typed on here that I thought might be relevant. But really what you want to do is, starting from that definition, figure out, was this person free to leave? It's a helpful thing. All of us learned that in first-year criminal law, right? So was the person under arrest in the sense that were they free to leave? Were they being held captive? Did they have to ask permission to go out? Now, the other crossover that you sometimes see in the TV is religious organizations can also, particularly the ones that are high-demand religious organizations with cult-like characteristics, can have foreign people working for them in those contexts. And the person might not see themselves as a victim of trafficking. And you're listening to the story about how they got here and what they're doing for a living and who they report to and who they have to obey. And you say, something about this doesn't feel right. Okay, so those are situations where the thought of a T visa might cross your mind. Now there's other, it's physical abuse, it's wages. Also, there's this drama around what happened when you decided to leave. And sometimes there are lots of issues, particularly where there's like family-based peonage going on, where somebody's, it actually happens. Someone whose family is in service to a certain family in the Philippines or in Mexico, to a wealthy family, and then their kids get sent up here to deal with the kids up here, and you have a generation, the next generation of slavery takes place within the United States. It happens. There's been cases, okay? Are you afraid of your employer? How are they controlling you? And all of that. Are you afraid, this can also happen in the context of the cartel, so are you afraid if you get deported back to your country that somehow you're going to be in trouble for this? The other bright line legal requirement for the trafficking visa is the applicant is physically present in the United States on account of the trafficking. Okay, this is one of the harder requirements because you have to say, well, you didn't meet this person until you were on the street in El Paso or San Diego, and then they offered you a job, in the Northwest, and they took you here, and now you're in debt bondage slavery. That might be a crime, but that's not trafficking because they weren't involved with you before you crossed the border. Okay, so there has to be a border crossing connection to it. And then there's an extreme hardship requirement. the applicant must show that she would suffer extreme hardship through unusual and severe harm if she or he were removed from the United States. And just for our general immigration literacy, we should look at factors establishing extreme hardship, because there's other contexts, for example, cancellation of removal and certain waivers, where these factors are also important. How am I doing on time, by the way? Oh, looks like I have, is it 15 more minutes that I have, or is it half an hour? Is it 15 minutes? Okay. So just a list of factors that both individually and cumulatively can establish extreme hardship. You have the applicant's age and personal circumstances, any health-related concerns, either physical or mental illness, and in that situation, like say somebody is suffering from a mental illness or a physical illness and they're not likely to be treated in their home country, that's a factor involving extreme hardship that can be balanced in making this determination for this part of the T visa test. Also, losing access to courts and criminal justice, and sometimes in the domestic violence situations that's important. Other times, maybe somebody is suing the factory where they were held in wage slavery, for example. And if they get removed from the United States, they won't be able to continue that lawsuit, or they won't be able to call their lawyer as easily, and there'll be issues around that. Okay, so those are some of the things. Other hardship factors: would the person likely become a victim of trafficking again? And we've seen this with a lot of the sex workers who are trafficked, that if they're returned to their country, because it used to be in the United States, because we believe in justice so much, that we would liberate women from these situations of injustice, and then discover that they were undocumented, and then deport the victims. That's how we deal with those issues, because after all, we believe in justice, right? And then what happens to a woman like that in her hometown if everybody knows now that she's marked as a sex worker? And so the cycle begins again. And we've seen people who have been trafficked from Mexico to the United States suddenly getting trafficked to another country, to Australia or Europe or something. Okay. Now I'm going to move to the fourth section of this talk. So now we talked about asylum. We talked about U visas for victims of violence. We talked about VAWA for the spouses of citizens and residents. And we talked about the T visas. And now I want to talk about generalized questions based on issues of inadmissibility. And this all comes from, this is actually Immigration Law 101, except it's Section 212A of the Immigration and Nationality Act. And it's a whole list of things that if they're true about you, you can't get into the United States. And this list has a really long history. It started out where you couldn't be Chinese and get into the United States. It started out you couldn't be poor, or criminals. Or you couldn't be a polygamist, or you couldn't be an anarchist, or you couldn't be a communist, or you couldn't be illiterate. And you just go down this list, and then you can't be gay either and get into the United States under during certain historical periods. Okay, so what is this list of people who don't get into the United States? It's precisely the direct enactment into law of the common prejudices of white America. Pure and simple. How do you think we got a racial quota system in immigration between 1924 and 1965? And believe me, the effects have not disappeared since 1965, when it was ostensibly repealed. Until 1990, between 1917 and 1990, homosexuals and gays were excludable from the United States, and they didn't even say the word out loud because it's, it's so terrible, we can't even say the word homosexual out loud. In fact, litigation related to it, all of the good stuff was in Latin. There's a case from Missouri, Penum in Orum Alterii in Mitere, which I won't translate because it might be considered sexual harassment. But like I say, all the best things are Latin. Okay, it's important to spot these issues because these are the issues that create problems for immigration cases. So if you're doing an interview, you want to spot the issues. However, please, 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 I'm begging you, don't buy into the logic and the emotional load that goes with these. It's easy to do. I struggle against this every single day in my practice. Oh, no, that person's not going to make it. And, because I'm all about, triage, right? I want to work on the cases that are going to win, and no, sorry, can't deal with that case. Well, can't you just think about it some more? Kelsey will tell you this is true about me. We try to advocate for people, and there's just no way. There's just no way because of the way the law is. We need to feel, every time we do that, we need to feel in ourselves, have the emotional depth to feel the grief that is involved with that. If we don't, and I guess I'm speaking from my place as, the old fat white guy, if we don't, we lose our consciousness and we lose our sensitivity to the system. It's the only thing that allows, because, all of the young, let me tell you, all the young Latinas, like, what are you doing in this? Well, because when I first became a lawyer, none of you guys were allowed to be lawyers. I mean, honestly, that's the answer. There weren't any Latino lawyers and there weren't any women lawyers. Oh, but there's this thing called solidarity, too. One of the first immigration lawyers who took on the exclusion of homosexuals was a Chinese American in Chinatown in Los Angeles. And he was the only immigration lawyer in California who would take on the case of a man who was excluded for being gay. And also for being a communist, but then that was another issue. Okay. And why did that guy do that? Because he had a conscience, and he remembered how for the last 100 years, xenophobia had dictated what American immigration law was, and said, this is my fight too. Okay, so as a gay man, and we all bring who we are to this, when we go down this list, oh my God, I'm preaching, I'm sorry. But it's really important for us to maintain this consciousness. And I like to say, what's the problem with being unaware? Well, the problem with being unaware is that you're unaware. Think about it. Admissibility. So, admissibilities are categorized by diseases. Do you suffer from a communicable disease? Are you able to show that you've got your shots? You have a behavior related to mental health or physical disorder which may pose a danger to yourself or others, or are likely to have such a behavior in the future. Sounds like instead of an immigration lawyer, you need to be a fortune teller or a shaman or something. Are you addicted to or abuse drugs? Have you helped bring non-citizens illegally to the United States? Have you given false information to gain an immigration benefit? Okay, you can see that these are quotes from the statute, by the way, just listed in forms of questions. You can see that this is a litany of prejudice, right? They're all sick. They're all liars. Have you used false documents? Have you claimed to be a U.S. citizen? I forgot to put, have you voted in an election without being a citizen? Have you ever entered the U.S. illegally? How many times? There we go with the Catholicism again. This is me riffing on my own background. When you entered, were you detained by immigration? Okay, now this is actually very significant. The majority of people who lack immigration remedies are people who have either antecedentes penales o de inmigración, who have, oh my God, I guess I'm getting tired. People who have prior situations with immigration or prior situations with criminal law? Have you been in the U.S. illegally for more than 180 days? Even that word illegally, that means you've been present without documentation. And very famous, it clicks in today, the new public charge stuff. Are you likely to become primarily dependent on welfare or other public benefits in the U.S.? Okay. Have you ever been arrested? Have you been deported or removed? Have you been convicted of a crime? Have you engaged in prostitution within the last 10 years? Are you a member or former member of a communist party or other totalitarian party? Are you a member of any terrorist organization? Now there's a question that I suggest you don't ask in your interview. It tends to disrupt the whole friendship dynamic. And you know what? I've never had a client admit to me at an intake interview that they're a terrorist. Whatever that means. Have you ever had any military type training? You know, I had a kid from Guatemala, bless his heart, as they say. He's a little straight boy who was very proud of his military school education and said yes to that question during his asylum interview and screwed up the whole thing. It took them 3 years to vet him for military training because his parents thought they'd make a man of him by sending him to a military school. Have you engaged? Have you participated in the persecution of others on account of race, religion, national origin, or political opinion? Now, we could talk about that, but if you're a persecutor, asylum is not your remedy. Okay, I've had people come in, well, I'm a colonel, you know, and, well, are you afraid to go back? Yes, of course I'm afraid to go back because everybody knows what I did when I was in power. Uh-huh. Right. Yes?
The terrorist organization, is that according to the U.S.?
Okay, the question is the terrorist organization according to the U.S.? And the answer is yes, it's designated organizations on the list. But that has changed over time, and the effects of it have also changed. And so, you know, there were a lot of Americans who were applying to be federal employees when Obama first became president, who were desperately counting how many years since their last illegal trip to Cuba because, you know, they were worried about precisely those kinds of things coming back to haunt them. And hint, 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 if, I shouldn't get into this area, if Bernie gets the nomination, one could expect this line of inquiry to be back in public discourse about people's distant pasts and what they may or may not have said. And just for context, I think once in 1976, I played hooky from high school here in Seattle and hitchhiked downtown to Pioneer Square with my guitar and sat in front of the Marxist-Leninist bookstore and played radical songs with some friends. Does that make me a member of a terrorist organization? Oh, I was wearing a little Mao hat with a red star. Yeah, don't do that. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question actually about the first one. Have you ever been arrested?
Wait, hold on. There's no way.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, the question is about being arrested.
I have a question about the first one. Have you ever been arrested? You talked earlier about how police can sometimes abuse their power, and essentially going back to our original talk about sort of ways that you can get in through asylum. I mean, if they were arrested because of persecution, like that's an automatic bar, right? Because that can be used as how the state persecuted. So how do you navigate that, I guess, in terms of like, it's not an automatic no, it depends on the intent and abuse of the state, right?
It's not an automatic no. The question here in this context is meant to highlight an issue that needs to be spotted. If you have a prior arrest and it's a political arrest, then you should have a chance to explain that. There's case law from 1897, the first asylum case to go to the Supreme Court, and it's in re Eseta, where they make the distinction between prosecution and persecution. And what happened is that two Salvadoran generals who happened to be brothers were having a civil war, and one of them committed murder and then was ousted from the presidency, jumped on a steamer and showed up in San Francisco asking for asylum. And El Salvador was trying to extradite the general back to face trial where his brother, the new president, was going to have him hung. Okay, so that's an example. Is that persecution or prosecution? Well, on the one hand it's a murder case, on the other hand it's a political case. And I think that's very emblematic of El Salvador anyway, that particular case. All right, I think I want to end with this idea. We really appreciate everybody coming to Q Law and doing these clinics on all these issues, family law, consumer stuff, all the stuff that we're dealing with, LGBTQ issues, and then this immigration issue. And it's a really big help because there isn't enough help out there. And so don't be afraid to ask a few of these questions and take some notes. And if you're participating in that clinic, hopefully what you get from this type of presentation is a sense that you can competently ask a few questions. And you're not going to commit malpractice by doing it, and you're not going to commit any harm. And then my last little plea is be really nice to your clients, because they really deserve it.
So our next presentation is on gender designations and process changes for the gender X marker. Woo! So our speakers are Alice Starrett, Anaí Machiavelli, and Alphonse Littlejohn. Alice and Anaí are from Department of Licensing, and Al is from our dear friends over at Ingersoll Gender Center, where we have a partner clinic that is 6 years strong now. We are there once a month at their